Eric Weinstein, the brother of Brett Weinstein, has written a pretty interesting Twitter thread about an article by Ezra Klein. Ezra Klein over at Vox wrote what Eric Weinstein called the Rosetta Stone for SJWs and non-SJWs, or conservatives and liberals, however you define it. I don't know if either of them is entirely effective. The article that he wrote is rather interesting. He talks about how when women say kill all men, they don't really mean they want to kill all men. He talks about how from outside this bubble, if you're not a feminist on the left, you would assume that they really do want to kill all men. However, no, when they use the hashtag kill all men, I don't think they literally mean they want to kill all men. I think it just shows a level of disdain, a lack of empathy, and victimization of themselves. There's a lot of things wrong with them saying this. So we have this story. And I want to go back and forth between this and Eric Weinstein because Eric makes some interesting points, but actually, maybe it makes more sense to show Eric's first before we get into the article itself. So Eric said, Ezra Klein has written an important essay, a Rosetta Stone for SJWs, non-SJW left conservatives. This piece on the New York Times hiring of gender and race baiter, Sarah Jeong, is also spectacular in that it somehow manages to combine deep insight with barely believable cluelessness. And that's exactly what I thought when I read this. Because Ezra Klein, as I mentioned, he says, obviously, kill all men doesn't mean they literally want to kill all men, and that people just don't understand that. It's also really baffling to me that the only factions that exist are the alt-right and SJWs. Because let me just explain something to all of you. That's not true. And I'm sure many people who watch my videos understand that's not true, because I am not a social justice warrior, nor am I alt-right. And when I get angry at the New York Times for a lack of principles, ethics, and inconsistency in how they hire people, it has nothing to do with white identity or racism. It has to do with hypocrisy. It has to do with no standards, and it has to do with the New York Times playing politics, just picking a tribe and then saying, sure, we're going to do whatever we want. So yes, Ezra Klein, absolutely clueless. And let's read on. He says, Ezra describes feminist Twitter, which doesn't of course actually exist by virtue of Twitter's open design, as a place where the words kill all men came to mean simply, it would be nice if the world sucked less for women. He says you sort of have to read it to believe it. Now, I'll disagree with Eric here. Feminist Twitter does exist. There are actual separate bubbles, okay? So when you follow someone and you retweet them and other people see that, it creates a bubble, a network of people who follow each other, all retweeting things and seeing one thing. They don't see what's happening on the other side. So there's been data that shows that there's like Trump Twitter and left Twitter. It's actually much more complicated than that. There's like right and left, then there's Trump and resistance, and then there's like feminism, and there's weird pockets. There's like a video game section. If everybody on Twitter, for the most part, is into, one or two things, they're going to follow the same people who follow the same people and retweet the same stuff. It does become concerning then when feminist Twitter involves massive celebrities with tens of millions of followers, in which case I can see what Eric is saying. Theoretically, or I should say technically, feminist Twitter doesn't exist because high-profile celebrities with tens of millions of followers are espousing this rhetoric. So it's really hitting more than just the feminist base. So let's read on. He says, as you can see from Ezra Klein's emotive shadings, he's deeply troubled by patriarchy, yet only mildly annoyed at kill-all-men feminism. What I would call open racism, sexism against whites, men, is to him a kind of edgy, snarky in-group lingo, but weirdly sent in the open to all. I agree with Eric here. I also want to point out, and I think Eric does say this, he mentions that he's on the left. And the article says that the only people who are calling it racist or implies that it's a conservative alt-right thing. I think Sarah Jeong is racist because whether or not she was making a joke to Andrew Sullivan, we'll get into some of this stuff, but whether or not the things she was saying were jokes, she is denigrating white people to make a point, okay? She, in my opinion, views white people as beneath her because some of the things she was saying weren't in response to anybody, it wasn't trolling, it was literally her just talking to her friends. She would say to something like, she would respond to a friend like, what are you doing tonight? I don't know, this restaurant has too many white people, stuff like that. Yeah, that's not making a point. That's literally just disparaging white people. And I think she's racist and sexist, obviously. She got a ton of tweets. It's really, her Twitter account is vile, just to say the least. He says, What's so interesting about Ezra Klein's line of thought here is that he's describing a massive transfer of empathy. We are asked to understand Sarah Jeong's wild gender and race baiting as snark in the context of alleged oppression, and she and her group police microaggression. What Ezra Klein is describing to conservatives here is a recently mainstream left I've never seen before, and I'm on the left. The woke network got confused that by breaking into the big time, kill all men level privilege is scrutinized out of the network as straight up bigotry. Listen, I understand that people who say kill all men aren't literally advocating to massacre every male. However, there is something that's called the Scum Manifesto, which I'm not going to pull up because I'd probably get in trouble for YouTube would probably punish me. I believe it's the Scum Manifesto. It actually advocates for killing all men and castrating little boys. It's really disgusting. I assure you, there are absolutely women who use kill all men literally, and they float about the feminists who use it as snark. The same is true when the left says there are people on the right who are, nationalists and constitutionalists, but white nationalists float among them. Of course, there's an overlap. Ethno-nationalists and civic nationalists are still nationalists, so they still agree on certain issues. Jordan Peterson talked about this, how because he criticizes and challenges the regressive left, Nazis like that. So there's going to be an overlap in certain values, but Jordan Peterson's values don't go in that direction. They go in the other direction, right? So it's kind of like a hill. Jordan Peterson's not going uphill. He's flowing downhill, but the Nazi scum flows downhill too. So you catch some of the flack. And that's why I think it's important that people regularly call out extreme racism and extremism from both sides. Side note, Majid Nawaz is awesome. If you don't know who he is, he runs the Quilliam Foundation, and he combats what he says, extremism from the left, the right, and from the heavens above, which is religious extremism, fundamentalism. And he talks about reciprocal extremism, that when you get crazy, when you get ethno-nationalist extremists on the right, you're going to see SJWs on the left. When the left claims they're combating white nationalists, show up and beat Trump supporters, you're going to rally people further, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. The point is, kill all men might be a joke, but I guarantee you a lot of people don't use it as a joke. And even the people who do use it as a joke are still saying something that's horrifying and shouldn't be funny. Genocide, they're not using it as a joke, right? I would understand if somebody was saying something facetiously that was meant to make you laugh. But this is a political point. Kill all men is used to push a political idea. And that political idea is the world should be better. But imagine if someone said kill all, an insert group, and they were like, oh, we don't actually mean that group should be killed. We're just saying they have too much power. Yeah, no. It's one thing if you're making a joke like George Carlin. He said, George Carlin has a bit where he talks about how people think rape isn't funny. He says, what about a mouse raping a deer? That's funny, right? And everybody laughs. Yes, I understand the point there is humor. The point of saying kill all men is more of an in-group joke among themselves, but it's pretty messed up to use something like that. Now, I understand there's nuance. Not everything is black and white. And I don't think, actually, personally, kill all men actually might cross the line. As much as I understand the concept behind it, I'm pretty sure it does violate Twitter's terms of service, yet for some reason they don't get banned for it. But actually on Facebook, women are being banned and suspended for using kill all men because it does violate their terms of service. So there's a difference between a joke about something deplorable or horrifying and straight up using a political term that advocates for a genocide or for patricide? Is that what it? No, that's when you kill your dad. Whatever it means when you kill guys, whatever the Latin is. Yeah, you're going to get in trouble for it. We're in interesting territory. I tend to err on the side of free speech, but it can become problematic when we don't know who actually means what they're saying and whether it's a joke. So some people have gone to prison for rap lyrics because we don't, some rap lyrics are direct threats out of context. It's hard to say. But in this instance, the point is, it is bigoted to say something like kill all men, just like it is bigoted to say kill all women or insert race. Now, personally, where you draw the line is, I don't know, because that could be conveyed as a threat. You're actually advocating for wiping out a race or a gender. So maybe we should avoid that kind of language. But regardless, it's targeting an identity, and it's targeting an identity in a pretty nefarious way. But let's continue, because I only got a few more minutes on this video. He says, I learn on social justice Twitter, Sarah Jeong and her ilk don't mean white people when they say white people, they mean the dominant power structure, and anyone with an iota of self-awareness gets this on the left. Yeah, they say that, but it's not true. It's absolutely not true, because if it were true, they wouldn't yell at me all the time for passing. The idea of passing wouldn't exist if they were talking about dominant power structures. They're literally talking about pale-skinned people and certain facial features and things like that. Although where they draw the line, I don't quite know, because I have very obvious non-white features, yet they attack me. Even though they know I have non-white features, they say passing. If the idea was that they weren't talking about white people and they're talking about the dominant power structure, which favors what we call white people, then the idea of passing wouldn't exist, because passing literally means you look like a white person. So logic, a bit not there. He says, "This is hard to believe if you haven't read it yourself. I almost feel like I'm making it up, but right now Sarah Jeong in her new job at the New York Times is the dominant power structure, and by Ezra's claims on SJW lingo is therefore improbably a white male fight the power." So, right. When Ezra Klein says that she's talking about the dominant power structure, and Sarah Jeong is a Harvard-educated lawyer and now employee of the New York Times living in New York City, I'm sorry, but she literally is the power structure. And let me just say this to those who didn't vote for Donald Trump, or who might not understand why people did vote for Donald Trump. Middle America, they're not wealthy, okay? I think the median income in this country is like $50,000, but the average income is like $35,000. I guarantee you Sarah Jeong makes substantially more than that. The editorial board of the New York Times, I'd have to imagine is at least a six-figure job, maybe more. It's hard to know, but she's Harvard educated. So I would give her an estimate of 150, right? This is what we deal with. Wealthy elites, Harvard educated, whether or not their parents were is a different story. These are people who have power, are in a dominant position. She is a soon-to-be editor at the New York Times, Harvard educated, massive amount of power and privilege, attacking white people in general, attacking men in general. And you know what? There's a 35-year-old white guy who's making $25,000 a year, breaking his back, working 40 to 80 hours per week to feed his family and struggle, knowing that his kids are not going to make it to college, that he's going to try as much as possible to make that happen. There's a woman who is breaking her back, lifting heavy objects, making $25,000 to $30,000 a year, working day in and day out so they can give their kids a better life. And then you hire someone who says white people are the problem because they have power. No. Class is the issue. And it's really upsetting to me that Occupy Wall Street was dealing with class. And I don't agree with a lot of the socialist policies, but in the early days of Occupy Wall Street, you actually had the left and the right talking about Wall Street being a problem, about inequality being a problem. Yes, there were a lot of conservatives that said, oh, get out of here, you far lefties, but there were conservatives down there. And sure enough, within a couple days, the identitarians showed up and started pointing the finger at white people, and then for some reason the conservatives left. Ron Paul supporters were down there. Luke Rudkowski of We Are Change, who was a big Ron Paul guy, I don't know what, he's like an anarchist, right-wing libertarian guy, was down there. It wasn't all far lefties. There was a lot of interest in challenging institutional power. But what happens when the narrative becomes about white people? You end up with wealthy, Harvard-educated elites working at the New York Times blaming white people for having privilege. You end up with Anne Hathaway, a multi-millionaire celebrity, saying white people can't experience these problems. You end up with Bernie Sanders. Bless his soul, but he went on stage and says white people can't understand poverty. I'm sorry, that's absolutely incorrect. I understand the differences in institutional power and racism and all that stuff, but I assure you, as you sit atop your ivory tower sipping your tea with your Harvard degree behind you, telling people what they should and shouldn't think, there are going to be people who are offended when you rag on them for their race or gender, and it is not justified. But anyway, I guess I'm not going to get into Ezra Klein's article. Suffice it to say, I think Eric, took it apart decently. There's a lot of things in here where it seems like Ezra Klein is somewhat flabbergasted, but understanding that people outside his circle don't get what these words actually mean. But let me just add one final thing. When he says that kill all men doesn't mean kill all men, it means it would be nice if the world sucked less for women. I assure you there are people who get that concept and still don't like that you're willing to denigrate them to make a political point. And then I don't know if he talks about there's an alt-right thing in here somewhere, but I don't. Oh, here we go. He says much of the Jeong furor has been about actually racist alt-right trolls weaponizing old tweets in bad faith to get an Asian woman fired from an important job. No. Well, he phrased it rather correctly. He said much of. What does that mean? Does it mean 5 tweets out of the 100 that were dug up? No. The people who are angry aren't overwhelmingly alt-right. He didn't say that, but when you phrase it this way, it makes it seem like it's just the alt-right white nationalists who are angry, when in reality, I made a video about it, the white nationalists are happy because Sarah Jeong's tweets and the support from the New York Times is elevating what they called racial consciousness. Okay? It's not a good thing. The identitarians like this. White identitarians like it when they have overt attacks against them because it allows them to recruit anti-identitarians, people who believe that you can be whatever race, identity, we shouldn't rag on people. We don't like it. So you know what? No, I will say this. Ezra Klein is totally wrong. And I will also add that if he doesn't see a problem with attacking people for being white or attacking people for being men, Ezra Klein is racist and sexist.